Beste collega's, welkom in onze commissie Dierenwelzijn, die vandaag gewijd is aan een hoorzitting rond het voorstel van decreet van collega Verduikt, Joosem, Min van Omen, Mieke Klaas, Hans van Hooft, Jana Werbroek en Sophie Mertens over het verbod op de commercialisering en de fabricage van producten die afgeleid zijn van kangoeroes. I also wish to welcome dear ambassador of Australia and the Australian delegation. And our first speaker, Peter Kreeser. We hebben een verslaggever nodig. Ja.
Ik denk dat er geen Engelse vertaling toe. We stellen de heer Peter van Rompuy voor.
Peter van Rompuy en collega Sterks, de beide. Dat mag. Oké. Onze hoorzitting gaat als volgt verlopen. We hebben vooreerst een delegatie van de Australische overheid. Peter Kreeser, die lid is van, counselor is van landbouw van de ambassade van Australië in Brussel. Professor Catherine Mosby, een expert-ecologist die online aanwezig is en straks zal presenteren. En de heer Rob Finlay, een branche-expert. Zij hebben samen 20 minuten presentatietijd. Vervolgens 10 minuten Dr. Dror Ben-Ami, een zoologist. En dan Anthony McKnight, Back to Country, en Peter Hewitt, Back to Country. Die hebben samen 10 minuten. En Dror Ben-Ami ook 10 minuten. So, dear Mr. Kreeser, I wish you welcome in our committee. And I give you the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the distinguished committee members that are here today for granting Australia this opportunity to present at this hearing. I want to just very briefly give a little bit of my background and my role. As Madam Chair has mentioned, I am the Minister Councillor for Agriculture posted to the Australian Embassy for Belgium and Luxembourg and the EU mission. My role is to facilitate two-way agriculture trade between the EU and Australia. I have a Master's in Natural Resource Management, majoring in Biodiversity Conservation. I have worked in the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service and also for the Australian Government's Department of Environment and Department of Agriculture. For the past 34 years, I've worked in the fields of biodiversity conservation, sustainable agriculture, biosecurity and trade. And today, as Madam Chair has also mentioned, we do have Ambassador Angus Campbell attending this hearing. With my background and experience, I might just quickly add that I'm very familiar with the challenges in Australia for ecological management and the challenges that we meet in how we do manage populations to ensure that ecosystems are able to be maintained in perpetuity. As a representative of the Australian Government, I would like to make some key points on the ecological and welfare importance of humanely managing kangaroo populations in Australia and the importance of supporting a commercial sector to assist achieve these objectives. The question of how to manage kangaroo populations should not be oversimplified. The approach must be grounded in empathy and high animal welfare standards. To be clear, no one wants to see animals suffer. Kangaroo population management in Australia is done under a coordinated framework involving federal and state governments and includes 3 key components. Aerial surveys in each state jurisdiction undertaken regularly to set quotas for culling to ensure a healthy population exists in the landscape. Secondly, a mandatory animal welfare code, the National Code of Practice for the humane shooting of kangaroos and wallabies for commercial purposes. And thirdly, state government regulation and oversight for strict accreditation and licensing of professional hunters for commercial harvests, including accuracy testing for achieving headshots and training to apply the code. The Australian Government values the role of the commercial industry and professional hunters to assist in population management and to minimise as much as possible the stress to kangaroos when culled, while also finding markets to utilise the meat and hides rather than leave to waste. A recent independent study by the University of St Andrews, Scotland, found New South Wales kangaroo survey system to employ the most up-to-date and robust methods for establishing population abundance and found the program to be thorough in its approach. The National Code of Practice that I've mentioned was developed in consultation with respected and independent institutions in Australia, such as the Australian Veterinary Association. Where the code deals with euthanasia, the recommendation is based on guidelines developed by the American Veterinary Medical Association. In considering alternative non-lethal measures for controlling kangaroo numbers, the challenges must also be appreciated. Kangaroos live across vast areas of the Australian continent and often live in very remote areas, and they number in the millions. Over 35 million kangaroos were estimated in 2024. This means that non-lethal solutions such as fertility control or fencing are impractical at scale. Claims that kangaroo populations would self-regulate without intervention are simply not supported in the Australian context. During drought, millions of kangaroos slowly starve to death in a manner which no veterinary practitioner would defend as preferable to euthanasia. If the commercial industry ceased to exist, state governments would fill the gap by increasing the culling they carry out or by issuing more licences to landholders to ensure overpopulation does not damage ecological balance. Banning kangaroo products on moral grounds is not justifiable given the ecological arguments for population control and as well the animal welfare code and practices that have been established. Comments that kangaroo population management is the largest slaughter of wild animals is not correct. Examples of similar approaches to culling wild animals that are much larger, yet without the same level of regulation, surveillance and quota management system include in Europe annually 3.7 million deer are shot and 3.3 million wild boar. In the United States, over 6 million deer are shot annually. In both of these jurisdictions, headshots are not mandatory for culling these animals, unlike Australia, where it is mandatory for the shooting of kangaroos. 100% of wild boar shot in Europe would be classified as a missed shot if the same metric was used. To respond to non-headshot claims made by the proponents stating that 40% of kangaroos are misshot, Australia does not accept this as credible. The source's methodology is in question. As well, an independent study from the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the RSPCA, found 95% of kangaroos were culled with a headshot. And furthermore, government data from registered processing facilities identified less than 20 non-headshot carcasses out of 300,000 processed. The question of young kangaroos, or joeys, can be very emotive. Despite the Australian National Code of Practice being fully aligned with the best veterinary practices, in Australia, the preference is to avoid shooting female kangaroos, and professional hunters are experienced at recognising females carrying young. An Australian government report in 2024 identified 85% of kangaroos harvested were male. I would like to make a further comparison to wild boar hunting, in this case in Flanders. In response to a series of parliamentary questions on the shooting of wild boar in 2018, the Flanders Minister of Environment, Nature and Agriculture said two pertinent points. Firstly, in Flanders, the legislation gives no advice on how to deal with piglets when shooting a sow. Most hunters will spare the sow with small piglets. For large piglets, the ethical hunter will shoot them to not be orphaned. Secondly, in Flanders, there is no minimum age for the culling of piglets or restrictions on shooting pregnant sows. It is understandable, therefore, that Australia would raise questions of discrimination with regards to equivalent practices between trading partners, noting also that the European Commission has flagged a need to notify the measure to the WTO, given this discriminatory potential. I'd now like to comment on the pure profile poll referred to in the explanatory notes of the decree proposal. The survey undertaken in 2024 suggests that 69% Flemish support the import ban of kangaroo meat and 78% that commercial killing of kangaroos is inhumane. To test public opinion with non-leading questions, Australia commissioned a YouGov poll that was undertaken in May 2026. According to this poll, nearly 60% of Belgians agree that wildlife populations should be managed according to scientific guidance and national laws, while 60% also support population control where necessary to maintain ecological balance. Importantly, the polling also shows that most Belgians were previously unaware that kangaroo management in Australia already operates under a science-based and government-regulated system. Once presented with balanced information, public opinion is far more nuanced than the pure profile poll suggests. The key point from the YouGov poll from Australia is that Belgian public opinion is not fundamentally opposed to wildlife management. The results show a balanced and pragmatic public attitude. To sum up, Australia remains committed to best practice and requests fair treatment in keeping with our trade relationship built on mutual respect. I will now hand over to Professor Moseby, who will provide more details on the ecological and welfare importance of managing the kangaroo population. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So we switch to Professor Catherine Moseby.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very loud and clearly.
Thank you. Greetings from Australia. I have a short statement and then a short video as well. So I'm a professor in conservation biology at the University of New South Wales. I have 180 peer-reviewed publications on restoration and conservation, including on the overabundance of macropods, kangaroos, and their impacts. But I'm also a landholder and I own 2 conservation properties where I've lived in the Australian outback with kangaroos for over 30 years. I've also worked with remote Indigenous communities who eat kangaroo, and I also eat kangaroo because I believe it is the most ethical meat to eat in Australia. It's free range, native, organic, high in protein and ethically harvested. So kangaroos are macropods. We have over 60 species in Australia, and some of them are threatened species. Some of the smaller ones, like bettongs and rock wallabies, these are animals that are killed by introduced feral cats and foxes. But the macropod species that are harvested in Australia are the larger species and they're not threatened. And they're overabundant because their main predator, which is the dingo, a type of dog, has been controlled. We've cleared the land and created grasslands, which the kangaroos love. And we've provided watering points for cattle and sheep that really sustains those kangaroo numbers. And this means that in areas where they're not harvested, they can build up to large, unsustainable numbers and contribute to significant environmental degradation. They cause significant browsing damage to plants. Many attempts to plant rare plants on our property have met with disaster because all of them were eaten by kangaroos. We see a reduction in plant cover. This makes it much easier for feral cats and foxes to hunt and kill our native wildlife. It also means there's less food plants for 3 threatened species like the malleefowl, which is a rare bird that feeds on seeds and vegetation. So in Australia, we have to manage and control the kangaroo to protect the environment and threatened species, but also to protect the kangaroo themselves. Because as Australia is a country with cycles of droughts and flooding rains, and the kangaroo has adapted to that and builds up quickly after rain. But when you have no harvesting, when you provide that permanent water and you remove the predators, the kangaroo numbers build up to unnatural numbers. Then, as conditions become dry, they first starve to death in their hundreds of thousands. People say to me, why don't you just feed them? Firstly, we're talking about millions of kangaroos over millions of square kilometres. Australia is the size of 250 Belgiums. Secondly, providing extra food just sustains the population above carrying capacity, making even more of an impact on other native species. People say to me, if you leave them alone, they will naturally reach an equilibrium. But the truth is, without predators, if you leave them alone, they'll increase until they eat themselves out of house and home and starve to death during the next drought. Then after the next big rains, they'll breed up again and starve to death again during the next drought, all the while causing environmental damage. In the last drought on our property, I watched kangaroos starve to death en masse. We shot as many as we could to put them out of their misery, but millions starved in a slow, painful death. They were going into public toilet blocks and eating toilet paper. They were even eating the stomachs of other dead kangaroos. It was sad, it was horrific, and it made me very angry. This is poor management. Letting kangaroos build up to unsustainable numbers and then die is wrong. We have an obligation to manage them in Australia. So sometimes we do fence kangaroos out of high conservation areas, but this is unrealistic over large areas. Regulated and accredited harvesting is an ethical and pragmatic solution supported by both Indigenous and conservation leaders. It keeps kangaroo populations healthy, It keeps plant communities healthy and it supports threatened species. Importantly, banning the regulated kangaroo industry in Australia will not save kangaroo lives. Kangaroos will still die. Many will be shot by farmers under culling permits and left on the ground and wasted. Many in national parks will die of starvation in their hundreds of thousands during droughts and will have even more environmental degradation. My experiences are not unique. Indeed, I co-authored a national position statement supported by 25 leading ecological, conservation, wildlife veterinarians and landholder groups that represent thousands of experienced and qualified people. They all acknowledged the widespread and significant impacts of overabundant kangaroos and called for regulation of numbers. I firmly believe that a regulated kangaroo industry is the most ethical and sustainable way to manage kangaroos in Australia. I'm now going to play a short video, which I co-produced with some other experts. Okay.
Just having these untruths being perpetuated about kangaroos being on the verge of extinction when we've got hundreds of thousands of kangaroos just dying out in Australia's deserts, probably millions all up, and you just walk around out in the scrub and there's a smell of death, and it's really distressing. And walking past kangaroos that are too weak to get up and walk, there's just not enough food for them. These should have been managed a long time ago. So we're not talking about a knee-jerk reaction to a drought, we're talking about long-term sustainable management for the welfare of the kangaroos and the country. If we're not managing our kangaroo numbers, that's threatening their existence, it's threatening the existence of a whole lot of other animals.
So we're losing our biodiversity as a consequence of failing to take adequate action, both in terms of the amount of habitat and failing to look after the bits of habitat that we've got left.
The best way of looking after these kangaroos is when they're still healthy, ethically harvesting them with accredited hunters rather than having to put them down when they're already suffering and already ruined the environment. I'd love to debate anybody who could point to a form of meat production that was more ethical than kangaroo harvesting.
The kangaroo, not only just as a food source, but as a totem, as an emblem, is very important to our people. This is not a new thing whereby kangaroo harvest has just started in recent times. Kangaroo harvesting has happened for tens of thousands of years, if not since the beginning of time. All of a sudden there were people who are ill-informed want to come up with the solutions that don't include what's gone on for tens of thousands of years. What's happening is people come with the zeal of trying to say what is best for our people. But on one hand, they're saying we have a right for cultural use of a resource like kangaroos, but at the same time, they don't want us to participate in the industry because they're taking it away from us. So it's like saying, yes, you can. However, we were only kidding. No, you can't.
We really need to manage our kangaroos in order to manage our conservation estate.
And really one of the best ways to do that is to eat more kangaroos.
Seeing 2,000 kangaroos dying under the trees, it's really sad, it's really quite depressing, and it's really wrong. We should know better than that. We should do better than that.
Poor old Ruse had his eyes pecked out by the crows, and there's 2 eagles just here as well, starving to death.
When people are saying, oh, poor little Skippy, well, this is about looking after poor little Skippy. Quite often in the cities, we see people who are the decision makers, and they'll make a decision from a high-rise building rather than being out there and to understand what's really going on the ground. This is real, what we're talking about. This is factual, and that's a problem and a concern for us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mosby, for your speech. And now we move over to Rob Finley, who's also online.
Yeah, g'day. Yama all. My name's Ron Finlay. I'm a proud Aboriginal man and a descendant of the Kamilaroi Dunghutti Nations people in Australia. I'm based in central west of New South Wales. I'm a kangaroo harvester and trader and have worked in the industry for over 24 years. This is something that I will hand down to my children because it has given me and taught me so much. For me, it's about sustainable use of a cultural resource and part of a well-regulated wildlife management program, arguably one of the world's best. Having been involved directly with the kangaroo industry for 24 years, I know it operates to the highest standard of animal welfare. Kangaroo harvesters undergo strict training and must pass a nationally accredited test before being licensed. Accuracy testing is compulsory and is completed every 5 years. To suggest large quantities of kangaroos are wounded is simply not true. Shooting stationary animals from a stationary vehicle with a single shot to the brain, is there any better humane outcome for an animal that will be culled under a management program? Yes, some juveniles are killed by the industry, just as juvenile pigs are killed in Europe as part of the wildlife management practices. The methods used by kangaroo harvesters are proven to minimise suffering by animal welfare scientists. They are not cruel and are comparable to many methods used in the domestic meat industries. What is inhumane is how kangaroos die in the thousands when populations are not managed or sustainable, like in a drought. Some may say this is normal, but it's not. I'm a member of the Australian Wild Game Industry Council, in which members handle 90% of harvested kangaroos in Australia. Like me, 10% of the Australian Wild Game Industry Council members are Aboriginal people. Aboriginal people and Aboriginal Australia has never been about one voice, one culture, or one way of life. There are hundreds of nations across the continent, each with different languages, landscapes, food systems, laws, and cultural practices. To suggest all Aboriginal people hold the same beliefs about kangaroo harvesting ignores the diversity that has always existed within Aboriginal Australia. An important issue is the economic participation of Aboriginal people within the kangaroo industry. In many rural and remote communities, kangaroo harvesting is one of the few industries that can provide practical employment opportunities connected to country, cultural knowledge, and land management skills. These Aboriginal people know. For decades, Aboriginal people have contributed to the kangaroo industry as harvesters, processors, transport operators, land managers, and community leaders. Greater Aboriginal involvement in harvesting and processing creates pathways for economic independence in regions where employment opportunities are limited and where communities often experience significant social and economic disadvantages. Without commercial utilisation, many kangaroos controlled for grazing management would simply be left as a wasted resource. The commercial kangaroo industry supports a circular economy by ensuring animals harvested under regulated management programs are fully utilised for meat, pet food, leather, and other products rather than discarded. Kangaroo populations remain abundant across Australia and are arguably under arguably one of the best wildlife management systems in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Finlay, for your presence and your presentation. Now we give the floor to Dror Ben Ami, who holds a PhD in zoology, and he has the floor for 10 minutes. Dear sir, I give you the floor.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for giving me the opportunity to present to you on the impacts of the kangaroo industry. I'm a PhD, a doctor in zoology, specializing in wallabies and kangaroos. I did my research at the University of New South Wales. In the lab, we had about 100 years worth of research experience into kangaroos and wallabies. And I was trained, part of my training was in the Outback Station, Fowler's Gap, where all the 4 species of kangaroos occur, alongside with also sheep. It's a working sheep station. So I have also seen what's going on. And I'm going to start with a 2-minute video of the kangaroo industry, so you can see the horrors that go on at night with the kangaroos, because the code is fantastic, but it's unenforceable. That is the main issue. And then I will say a few words about biodiversity and the impact of livestock. So I'm going to get going. I'm going to share my screen and then the video. I hope you can see the screen.
There is one bullet.
So these images are all taken from the commercial industry, from the commercial killing of kangaroos. This is not just people shooting kangaroos, and this is a welfare crisis, because the commercial shooting is unenforceable. The code of practice is unenforceable, and that is quite unfortunate. I'm going to keep sharing my my presentation. Are you seeing me or the presentation? Excuse me.
We are not seeing your presentation.
I'm trying to share my presentation. It's not. Can you enable my sharing, please? Thanks.
Yes, you should be able to share now.
Okay, thank you. All right. Can you see it now?
Yes.
So in Australia, there are four species of kangaroos that are harvested, not just one species. So to talk about overabundance as one kangaroo, it doesn't make sense. There are four species with different habitats. There's the eastern grey kangaroo in the east coast of Australia, liking forests and temperate grasslands. Western grey kangaroos occur in southern Australia, also need some tree cover, and more rain. Red kangaroos occur in the center of Australia, in the drier areas, in the deserts, and the wallaroos occur throughout all the country, but in hilly country, and therefore, and they're isolated. So it's four species of kangaroo, not one, and there are 1,600,000 kangaroos killed per year, 1.6 million to 1.8 million. And you should note that Belgium is the country that receives the highest amount of exports from Australia, 520 tons or 520,000 kilograms of kangaroo meat per year. On average, it's about 3 kilograms per carcass of kangaroos. So that's about 120 to 170,000 kangaroos are killed just for the Belgian market, which is a third of exports. A third of exports from Australia goes to Belgium. Now, we're saying this is a welfare crisis because the code of practice is theoretical. But it's poorly regulated because it occurs at night in very remote locations, and there's no independent monitoring at the point of kill. And therefore, the welfare violations are inherent into the commercial industry. So it's just in writing, it's not in reality what you're hearing. The chiller inspections, so those are inspected, but they cannot detect the most serious welfare issues that occur in the field where the kangaroos are actually shot. And this is because dependent young are dispatched. They're either killed or let go at the point of kill in the outback. The heads of kangaroos are severed and left in the field. So we don't know how the heads were hit, whether they hit in the snout or below the head. You saw some very disturbing images, and this does occur regularly, but the heads are detached and left in the field per the industry regulations. Also, body shot kangaroos that are not hit in the head, but occasionally hit in the body, are not brought into the chillers. They're left in the field because there's no compensation for those bodies. So a lot of the evidence, most of the evidence is left in the field. The magnitude of the harm, the welfare harm is immense. At least 400,000 joeys. This is a dependent young. This is a conservative estimate. It's probably much higher. Either their skulls are smashed or they're abandoned in the field. We know shooters can't or won't kill dependent young because they feel bad about it, but at the end, the young that hop away end up dying from starvation, dehydration. This is accepted as inhumane by the leading welfare organizations in Australia and by the public in general. It's just socially unacceptable in Australia. It's the weak link of the industry is not able to regulate what happens to in the field, and it cannot regulate what happens to dependent young. They just suffer. There are also about 50,000 to 400,000 adult kangaroos that are not hit in the head. 50,000 is the conservative estimate that you heard about before from the RSPCA. 50,000 per year based on 1.6 million kangaroos. We have numbers that are, and this 50,000 is based on inspection of chillers, of bodies in chillers, not of bodies that are left in the field or heads that are misshot and left in the field that I mentioned earlier. So that number is very conservative, and it's much higher, perhaps up to 400,000. The reason for this, it's very difficult to hit a kangaroo from 50 to 100 meters at night under variable weather conditions and field conditions. There's no there's no supervision of the shooting. I mean, the shooters are there on their own in the field without supervision. And so this is certainly not a humane outcome, not per the code of practice, and it's actually much higher than in other acceptable meat industries. Again, a lot of mention was made about drought. Drought does occur occasionally in Australia, not all the time. And rainfall is considered, for as long as I can remember, as the main driver of kangaroo populations, of the kangaroo numbers, not depredation by dingoes. That does help, but the main driver is rainfall. And the drought, it's important to state that the drought takes the unfit, the weak individuals. The commercial killing takes the strongest individuals. So this is an additive effect. One leads to the other. And it's also not correct ecologically. Drought filters the weakest out of the population. So drought does occur, but it's a natural process. I have to say that because of welfare issues, products from kangaroos are banned in California. They're banned by major clothing labels, by major shoe companies such as Adidas, Nike, and New Balance. And this is just constantly increasing as we become more and more aware of the horrors of the kangaroo industry. You can see here a global declaration on the kangaroo welfare crisis by civilian society. There are upwards of 80 organizations of animal protection and environment that are signed on to this decree that what's happening in the kangaroo industry is unacceptable. And how do we know the maths? Because we're saying it's in the dark. Well, we know how many young female kangaroos have, and we know that 30% of kangaroos that are killed are female. And so 25% of those females are likely to have a young foot, 70% are likely to have pouch young, and the estimate then is well upwards of 400,000 dependent young that are collateral to the industry. They happen, it's unavoidable. I'd just like to touch a little bit on some of the other issues before I conclude that were brought up. There's talk about harm to farmers, but as we know today, unlike 30 years ago perhaps, there's very little competition with livestock. Damage mitigation is not part of the aims of the commercial industry. And therefore also the damage to farmers has decreased to 40 million per year as of 2004. That's not much, and most of it is due to fencing damage. So it's not about impact on farmers. Sustainability, kangaroo abundance was always high. It was never low. I mean, it historically was high, as seen in journals, etc. Historically, kangaroos are a necessary part of the ecosystem. They're known as engineers. And we know as well that the population estimates are highly inaccurate. They are online, and one can see increases of 100%, 200% from year to year, things that are biologically impossible. And I have to say that since 2015, the take of kangaroos has remained about 1.6, 1.8. But since 2015, we've had a new state added on to the commercial harvest, and some other areas in South Australia have also been added, which total to about more than 200,000 square kilometers have been added to the area of the commercial harvest, yet the take has remained the same. And this is a concern to me as a biologist. How could it be that the take is still the same? Now, I agree, sometimes overabundance may happen, but it usually is localized. And when there is a localized overabundance, then it can be local management, but there's no need for a national harvest or a national commercial kill of 1.6 million kangaroos every year. It's just not necessary. And finally, in terms of health, the health risks to the European population, 60% of human pandemics arise from wildlife. Kangaroos are wild. They're shot in the wild. They're not raised in farms. And the supervising or the butchering of kangaroos in the field, where the intestines of the kangaroos are taken out at the point of shooting, is unsupervised. It's not done by butchers. It's done by shooters. that cut up open the carcass, take out the intestines, and throw them out in the field. Now, when in that process, all the bacteria from the gut may spill onto the meat, and that causes immense contamination. And we know that kangaroos contamination such as E. coli and Salmonella, but kangaroos harbor also other pathogens as well. Now, you don't see it today in the markets in Europe because the meat is washed with lactic acid. But that washing by lactic acid gets rid of the bacteria, but it doesn't get rid of the inherent process which is lacking, which is unsupervised, and still puts the European population that chooses to eat kangaroo meat at risk from disease. The Russians understood this and have found the same levels of contamination and have placed a ban on kangaroo products because of hygiene concerns since 2014 to this day.
Dear sir, can I ask you to conclude?
Yes, my last slide.
10 minutes are...
Yeah, my last slide, and I'm concluding. I'd just like to say that there's a hypocrisy in Australia. It used to be a rich whaling nation, one of the leading whaling nations in the world, until in the 1970s there was a royal commission into the whaling industry and on the issue of welfare and environment and population levels. The commission found that whaling needs to stop. This only occurred in the 1970s, and since then the whales are become a national treasure, and Australia is challenging Japan in the International Court of Justice on their whaling program. But at the same time, it continues to slaughter and maintain this untenable welfare issue with kangaroos in the commercial industry. So things can change, and Australia can certainly do better. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dror Ben-Ami. Now we move over to the final speakers, and they both represent Back to Country, Mr. Anthony McKnight and Mr. Peter Hewitt. You both have 5 minutes or 10 minutes to get up.
Okay. Thank you very much. Firstly, I'd just like to pay my respects to everyone's country, Belgium, people from other countries and all the Aboriginal people that are here as well, their country and the country that we're on. I'd like to also pay my respects to all the speakers that have spoken tonight or today. And because I always love listening to people and understanding where everyone's coming from. I'm Anthony McKnight. My language name is Dalawan. I'm an Awabakal Gomeroi Yuan man, and I'm also an associate professor at the University of Wollongong, where my work is about placing country centre. And so placing country centre instead of people. I think we've been putting people central for too long, since 1788, when AI, artificial intelligence, came to Australia in 1788. And we would not be in this mess if non-Aboriginal people, our non-Aboriginal brothers and sisters, worked with us in the first place, embedded our knowledge systems, together and respected our knowledge systems, but also need to pay respects to Uncle Max Harrison, who's now in the spirit world, who handed this legacy to Pete and I and others to care for our ancestor, our teacher, one of our knowledge holders, which is kangaroo. So country is our teacher, so that means kangaroos are our totems, our teachers, and they teach us so much on how to live on this land with respect, patience and tolerance. And we need to start taking care of the BRU. We hunted BRU as well. Pete and I still, or Pete can't because it's his totem, but we still hunt BRU, but it's done with respect and ritual and ceremony. And I'm sure brother who spoke earlier, I'm not sure if he's still on there, Ronald, it might be 10%, I think he said. If I'm wrong, I apologise, of Aboriginal people working in the industry. They may well be doing that within their law and with respect, ceremony and ritual. But there could be 90% that aren't doing that in respect, ceremony, ritual. As we can see of the presentation done beforehand. Yeah, I think Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Look, thank you to the Vlaams Parliament, the Flemish Parliament, who hosted myself and my brother Ricky, who's a Gumbaynggirr fella. We came and gave voice to kangaroo, or we call him BRU, in giving voice to the disrespect that kangaroo receives in Australia. In mainstream Australia, it's referred to as a pest. Why is it referred to as a pest? Through the voice that it's given in competition with sheep and other agricultural animals. This animal that's referred to as a pest has been on this continent for millions of years. It's carved out the river system, the landscape, and our old people learnt to nurture and care for that animal and learnt so many aspects around community from that. So when we talk about country, we're talking about that deep connection to the water, to the animals, to the trees. It sustains us and we sustain it in our own ways. So talking about that disrespect, we can see in that little film the disembowelment of the kangaroo, limbs chopped off. That's not done in ceremony. 400,000 unaccounted for joeys is not done in respect. Any other animals, agricultural animals that went through that same level of treatment, mainstream Australia would be up in arms talking to their local politicians about looking after those animals. Uncle Mac referred to kangaroo being my totem. That means I am that animal. I'm spiritually connected to that animal. So having the desecration of that animal seen, it impacts me. When we damage our country, we're damaging ourselves. There's a sickness that goes in that. And I see that sickness in that label as pest. The kangaroo's become a refugee in its own country. We can see where it's finding the artificial water places where there is refuge, and it's the story's told of huge numbers, which there is, but we're not seeing the damage caused by the agricultural animals. As I understand it, kangaroo snips the grass, or some of those other fellas rip the whole system, the roots out from the soil. So we're here to ask the Vlaams Parliament to ban the importation of kangaroo so that Australia can look at its relationship with its national emblem, something that it exports in the tons. We need to look locally to deeply understand, not at a federal level or at a state parliamentary level, having true numbers with people on the ground who understand that landscape, giving voice. The New South Wales parliamentary inquiry came about because it was the shooters who spoke about the disrespect. So to be able to hold space and give voice to that disrespect as an Aboriginal Yuin man, that is a motivation to speak that truth. So I'm speaking with Uncle, and we're not working off a script. We're speaking from the heart based on our own observations and teachings. So I'll pass it back over to you, Uncle.
Yeah, as we were saying before, it just comes back to respect for a creature that I was watching yesterday, and how they work as a family, how they work as a community. It's done in unity. It's done in respect. There's so much we can learn from BRU, for people here in Australia. So there's so much we can learn from them. And like one of the other brothers said, we harvest, and we did, but it was done in a completely different context. It was done knowing that other people had that as a totem, so they had to do it respectfully, where they they couldn't observe their own totem being killed, because if you shoot a kangaroo, I'm shooting Peter. If you shoot Peter, you're shooting a kangaroo in our cultural context. So it was done in all these understandings of respect. And BRU also has its own dreaming, so they need to look after that dreaming, and putting fences and farms and different things has disrupted that whole cultural context for the kangaroo itself, to look after its dreaming, to look after its songline, to care for all those ecological things that they eat. They don't eat to destroy it, they eat it so that then they maintain that life. So that grass, those foods maintain their life, and the kangaroo maintains their life of the food that they eat. It's a reciprocal two-way relationship of care, and we were a part of that as people, but not a commercial size entity where what I've seen, there's no respect, as I said before. So it's how do we kind of build these relationships? How can we then learn from BRU itself and respect an entity that does so much for us people? And we don't often look at that. We don't look at how BRU actually does a lot for us. Pete?
Thanks, Carl. Yeah, look, I'll round us out with, I don't understand kangaroo from a commercial extraction system and in knowing. And so to be asked to come back and give voice to kangaroo, especially to the Vlaams Parliament, who heard us so respectfully, we're asking you again to ban the importation of this sacred animal into your country. It's not a need, it's a want. The want for leather, the want for animal products. Help enable Australia to better care for its animal, its national icon and our sacred totem. Because at the moment, there's a international market driving culling across, I think, 60 Belgiums, I think it was described as. We need to be able to look locally and make these decisions, and Belgium can help us do that by closing that market. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. McKnight and Mr. Hewitt, for your speech. Can I first ask to all the speakers if it's possible to send their presentation to us? That would be much of a help. And also your text, if it's possible. Sure. This is how we proceed from now on. All the members of parliament will put their questions to the different speakers. Different speakers have also the translation. So because the members of parliament will put their questions in Dutch, we first take all the questions, and then in the same order as with the presentations, where we give the floor back to the speakers. Wie van de collega's wil eerst het woord nemen? Collega Verdaak.
Ja, dank u wel. Ik zou eerst en vooral alle sprekers willen bedanken voor hun bijdrages. Ja, ik denk dat dit voorstel van decreet dat ik deed samen met deze hoorzitting, dat tot vele vragen zou kunnen leiden. Hè. En we zouden vragen kunnen stellen over het feit van, ja, hebben wij die kangoeroeproducten nodig in Vlaanderen? Hebben we daar vlees nodig? Het antwoord daarop is nee. Het aanbod is bijzonder groot aan vleesproducten op ons bord, die heel vaak, bijna altijd, uit slachthuizen komen. Dus op zich zouden we die vraag kunnen stellen, maar die is eigenlijk niet belangrijk. We zouden ook onze vraag kunnen stellen, ja, is het aan dit parlement om te gaan bepalen hoe men in Australië aan populatiebeheer van kangoeroes doet? Ik vind dat niet. Ik vind niet dat dat aan ons is om daar ons in te mengen, of men in Australië vlees van kangoeroes eet of zo. Daar gaat het niet over. Waar het hier over gaat, wij zitten hier vandaag in de commissie Dierenwelzijn van het Vlaams parlement, en de vraag die wij ons moeten stellen is, zijn deze producten die beperkt, maar toch op onze markt komen, zijn die gelieerd aan dierenleed? Is dat de vraag? En dat is een moeilijke vraag. Hè. Het gebeurt heel ver van hier. We hebben vandaag sprekers gehoord die heel verschillende dingen daarover zeggen. Dus dat is natuurlijk bijzonder lastig. En ik denk dat we, als we nog meer informatie zouden hebben, dat we misschien die vraag makkelijker zouden kunnen beantwoorden. En dus ik ben eens gaan kijken van, ja, goed, wij hebben daar hier een debat over in het Vlaams parlement, maar heeft men daar in Australië zelf wel eens naar gekeken? En ik denk, een van de laatste sprekers verwees ernaar. Maar een 4-tal jaar geleden heeft het parlement van New South Wales, en collega's, het kan dus altijd erger, 3,5 dag lang hoorzittingen gehouden met meer dan 35 sprekers over dit topic. Ze hebben dat gedaan met een comité van 7 parlementsleden over de hele linker-rechterstrekking, dus de Greens, de Liberal Party, National Party, Labour Party en zelfs de Shooters, Fishers en Farmers Party zaten in het comité. En dus leek het mij wel interessant om even te kijken wat zijn de bevindingen van het parlementair onderzoek dat daar in Australië is gebeurd. Er zijn heel veel bevindingen, ik ga er even 3 uithalen die toch wel belangrijk zijn voor het debat, denk ik. Eén, was het parlementair comité van oordeel dat er twijfels zijn over die populatieschattingen. Ze zeggen het is heel moeilijk om exact te schatten hoeveel van die dieren er vandaag in ons land zijn. Dus dat is heel lastig. Een tweede belangrijke bevinding was dat ze zeggen ja, eigenlijk is er te weinig, zijn er onvoldoende wetenschappelijke gegevens over de ecologische impact. Maar vooral, en dat vind ik een hele belangrijke voor onze vraag waar wij vandaag mee zitten, in Australië, in New South Wales, zegt het parlement dierenwelzijn bij commerciële jacht blijft problematisch. Dat is een vaststelling van het parlementair comité Ginder. Zij zeggen, wij stellen vast dat niet alle dieren onmiddellijk sterven aan een schot, dat jonge dieren vaak indirect sterven wanneer een jonge moeder wordt gedood en dat toezicht in afgelegen gebieden, en dat is een heel belangrijk aspect natuurlijk, bijzonder moeilijk is. Ja, dat is de conclusie van het parlement Ginder. En dan stel ik me de vraag, ja, wie ben ik om de Australiërs die hun land veel beter kennen dan ik, om hen tegen te spreken. Dus ik heb eigenlijk straks maar 1 vraag voor de sprekers, maar ik zou nog 2 reacties willen geven op dingen die hier gezegd zijn. 1, ik ga er even mijn grootmoeder bij halen. Mijn grootmoeder zei altijd tegen mij, als je iets doet wat niet juist is, moet je dat niet proberen te vergoelijken met een ander slecht voorbeeld. Wat ik daarmee bedoel is, als hier het voorbeeld wordt aangehaald van de everzwijnen, heb ik het daar wel wat lastig mee. Er zijn vorig jaar in Vlaanderen 2500 everzwijnen afgeschoten. 2500. Als je dat aantal vergelijkt met waar het hier over gaat, is het natuurlijk van een heel andere grootorde. De tweede zaak is, er is geen enkele link met commerciële jacht. In Vlaanderen is er niemand die leeft van het afschieten van everzwijnen. Niemand. Want dat is natuurlijk een belangrijk aspect. Het gaat hier ook over een commercie. En 3, een everzwijn zet gemiddeld 6 jongeren per jaar op de wereld. Bij een kangoeroe, en ik ben geen expert, maar dat heb ik toch wel kunnen terugvinden, een kangoeroe is dat gemiddeld 1 per jaar. Dus om het te zeggen, die vergelijking gaat absoluut niet op, vind ik. En ik vind het bijzonder raar dat dat argument hier wordt aangehaald. En het tweede argument, en dat is gewoon een vraag die ik me algemeen stel, is kangoeroes zijn ongeveer 20 miljoen jaar aanwezig in Australië. 20 miljoen jaar. En dus pas in dat laatste stukje van die 20 miljoen jaar is de mens op de proppen gekomen en zegt nu van kijk, als we ze niet binnen de perken houden, ja, dan gaat het helemaal mislopen. Dan gaan ze sterven tijdens een droogte, wat vandaag gebeurt ondanks het feit dat er die dieren worden afgeschoten, maar dan is dat een probleem. Wat ik lastig vind is, wij stellen ons vandaag in Vlaanderen de vraag, moeten wij dit soort producten nog invoeren, omdat wij niet met zekerheid kunnen vaststellen of er al dat die dierleed mee gemoeid is. We stellen ons die vraag en dat is blijkbaar een probleem. En dan stel ik mij de vraag, is dan het probleem een commercieel probleem of een ethisch probleem? Want dat is natuurlijk de 2 zaken die er gemengd worden. Uiteraard wordt dan ecologisch beheer gedaan. Dat doen we in Vlaanderen, doen we in Europa, doen we overal op de wereld. Dat klopt. Maar op het moment dat er natuurlijk commerciële belangen mee gemoeid worden, ja, dan krijg je natuurlijk een ander verhaal. En die 2 zouden toch best uit elkaar gehaald moeten worden. En dat is wellicht ook de reden waarom dat sommige landen, ze zijn hier genoemd geweest, Rusland, Californië heeft het recent nog bevestigd, gezegd heeft, we laten die producten niet meer binnen. Dus eigenlijk na het horen van deze tussenkomsten heb ik eigenlijk maar 1 vraag. Als ik lees in het rapport van het parlement van New South Wales dat men daar aangeeft van kijk, er zijn afspraken over de manier waarop die dieren gedood moeten worden, maar wij stellen vast dat die afspraken, de naleving van de controle in de bush, dat die bijzonder moeilijk is. Ik kan me dat voorstellen. Dat is een heel ander gegeven als hier in Vlaanderen, waarin onze dieren geslacht worden in slachthuizen, waar we heel streng op toezien. Dat is een gecontroleerde omgeving. De bush is natuurlijk iets heel anders. Ja, op welke manier kan men ons dan de garantie geven dat die producten die op ons bord komen, dat die op een correcte manier werden gedood? Dat dat niet geleerd is aan dierleid. Op welke manier kan men die garantie geven? Want ik ben heus bereid om het voorstel aan te passen. Ik ben bereid om het voorstel aan te passen om te zeggen van kijk, als Australië ons die garantie kan geven, dan willen we daarin meegaan. Maar ik kan niet anders dan vaststellen dat uw eigen collega's of onze collega's in Australië zeggen ja, die garantie kunnen wij vandaag niet geven. En dan lijkt me dat een commissie dierenwelzijn niet anders kan besluiten. Maar toch nog even, dus op deze reflectie had ik graag de reactie gekregen van de diverse sprekers. Tot daar, mevrouw de voorzitter.
Dank u wel. Wie wil nog aan te sluiten? Collega Joos. Dan collega Sterk.
Ja, dank u wel, voorzitter. Dank u wel aan alle sprekers, ook voor de tijd vrij te maken voor ons. Ik denk dat dit voorstel van decreet raakt dan toch een aantal vragen die we hebben over dierenwelzijn en in combinatie met het internationaal handelsbeleid. En vanuit onze fractie zijn wij daarom uiteraard bereid om te luisteren naar de experten. En de collega heeft het ook al aangegeven dat wij ook bereid zijn om eventueel aanpassingen te doen. Maar we moeten wel erkennen dat er in onze samenleving bezorgdheden leven over die jacht op kangoeroes en het gebruik van die afgeleide producten. Tegelijkertijd zijn we natuurlijk ook verantwoordelijk om een goed zicht te hebben op de juridische, economische en handhavingtechnische impact van zo'n mogelijk verbod. Ik had daarom toch nog een aantal vragen voor de sprekers. Aan meneer Peter Kreiser zou ik een vraag willen stellen rond die handel. Hij heeft er in het begin heel eventjes naar verwezen, maar u bent er nadien niet verder op doorgegaan. Maar in welke mate dat u denkt dat dit decreet verenigbaar is met Europese regels in zaken vrij verkeer van goederen? Is het verenigbaar met internationale handelsverplichtingen? U bent er eventjes bij gestopt, maar niet dieper op ingegaan. 2, het beheer van die populaties. U gaf aan dat dat niet eenvoudig is. Eigenlijk gaven alle sprekers aan dat dat niet eenvoudig is en dat dat op een verantwoorde manier moet gebeuren, dat er ook quota voor zijn. Ik ga er nog altijd van uit dat elk land dit doet met de beste bedoelingen, hun regels opmaken met de beste bedoelingen en dat op een zo goed mogelijk manier probeert te doen. U hebt verwezen naar strenge reglementeringen. Ik geloof dat ook. Maar tegelijkertijd horen we heel wat signalen van wetenschappers dat er op het terrein toch wel problemen zijn en dat er iets grondig misgaat. En dat er iets grondig misgaat met de controles. Die zijn waarschijnlijk bijzonder moeilijk. Regels kunnen heel erg goed zijn, maar als ze niet worden toegepast op het terrein, blijven ze natuurlijk dode letter. Ik hoorde dat ook de andere sprekers aangeven. Er is Australisch onderzoek, er is ook onderzoek van de Universiteit van Cambridge, die toch aangeeft dat de resultaten op het terrein niet goed zijn. En dan hoor ik heel wat sprekers verwijzen naar die commercialisering. Ik heb eigenlijk niemand horen zeggen dat ze tegen lokaal wildbeheer zijn. Ik heb niemand dat horen zeggen, maar telkens komt dat commerciële aspect daar dan bij en blijkbaar blinkt dat daar toch iets ligt in de mens naar boven. Toezicht is moeilijk, dat zou beter kunnen. Ik hoor ook de laatste spreker heel erg spreken over het respect dat mankeert op het terrein. Dus daar misschien toch nog graag een inzicht over. Dan wat betreft de statistiek. Wij blijken inderdaad een van de grootste importeurs van kangoeroevlees. De cijfers verschillen wat, maar het komt er toch op neer dat het gaat over ongeveer 120.000 tot 170.000 kangoeroes voor de Belgische markt. Wij hebben dat zelf ook proberen onder de loep te nemen. Dat is toch wel heel bijzonder eigenlijk. Dus ik vroeg mij af of dat daar Australische statistiek over bestaat. Welke verklaringen zijn daarvoor? Hebben jullie dat zelf ook onder de loep genomen? Zit daar ook een stukje doorvoer bij? Hebben jullie dat zelf bekeken? Ja, dat waren mijn vragen. Dank u wel alvast voor de antwoorden.
Dank u wel. Collega Sterks.
Ja, dank u, voorzitter. Ik wil ook eerst alle sprekers bedanken voor hun bijdrage aan deze hoorzitting. En het debat over de kangoeroeproducten raakt aan een fundamentele vraag. Welke verantwoordelijkheid nemen wij als Vlaanderen op wanneer het deel uitmaakt van een internationale productieketen? Ook wanneer die keten ver buiten onze grenzen begint en ver buiten ons directe toezicht valt. De vraag is dus, willen wij als Vlaanderen een schakel zijn in de internationale commercialisering van dit product? En daar ligt wel ook mijn bezorgdheid. Want de kangoeroe-industrie wordt vaak voorgesteld als noodzakelijk wildbeheer, maar tegelijk bestaat er een volledige internationale commerciële keten rond kangoeroevlees en producten met export, verwerking en distributie wereldwijd. En dat creëert volgens mij toch wel een economische prikkel die veel verder gaat dan louter wildbeheer. En ik heb daarbij nog wel enkele vragen. Nadat de sprekers hun toelichting gegeven hebben, zou hetzelfde afschot vandaag nog plaatsvinden indien er geen internationale exportmarkt voor vlees en leder bestond? Vanaf welk punt erkennen de sprekers dat dit niet langer puur populatiebeheer is, maar commerciële exploitatie van wilde dieren? En kan iemand van jullie aangeven hoeveel procent van het jaarlijkse afschot dat jullie doen specifiek gebeurt voor commerciële verwerking en export? Is het economische model van deze sector niet net afhankelijk van een blijvend hoge afschotquota? En jullie hebben ook aangegeven, de jacht gebeurt vooral 's nachts op grote afstanden en in afgelegen gebieden. En daar roept ook wel wat vragen op. En hoe kunnen jullie effectief garanderen dat dieren onmiddellijk sterven na het eerste schot? En welke onafhankelijke controles bestaan er op gewonde dieren die ontsnappen? En hoe kunnen wij als Vlaanderen of als Europa überhaupt controleren dat deze normen in de praktijk worden nageleefd? En dan nog natuurlijk wat voor heel veel mensen heel gevoelig is. Wanneer een moederkangoeroe wordt afgeschoten, blijven de jongen, de joeys, in of nog aan haar buidel achter. Jullie codes laten dit toe, dat deze jongen worden gedood of achtergelaten. Klopt dit? Kan iemand bevestigen dat de huidige codes toelaten dat joeys worden gedood of achtergelaten? En waarom worden vrouwelijke dieren met jongen nog afgeschoten? En dan heb ik nog 1 vraag voor jullie. Als jullie enkel nog zouden jagen op kangoeroes met het oogpunt op het noodzakelijke wildbeheer, is de internationale commerciële exportindustrie bij jullie dan nog economisch rendabel? Dank u wel.
Dank u wel. Welkom aan onze bezoekers, de Commissie Dierenwelzijn. En we hebben een hoorzitting over import van kangoeroevlees. Dan geef ik nu het woord aan collega De Bleker.
Dank u wel, mevrouw de voorzitter. Dank u ook aan alle sprekers om dit dossier toe te lichten. Ik denk dat het toch belangrijk is dat we hier op basis van cijfers en niet puur op emoties gaan dit dossier behandelen. We hebben gezien dat de verschillende sprekers ook met verschillende cijfers en statistieken komen. Ik denk dat dat iets is waar we toch ook eens wat van meer nabij moeten kijken om dan op een degelijke manier tot een conclusie te kunnen komen. Want de vraag is natuurlijk, ja, klopt het beeld dat hier wordt opgehangen wel volledig? Hè? De autoriteiten, de Australische autoriteiten, die stellen immers dat de quota wetenschappelijk wordt bepaald, het effectieve afschot ruim onder het quota blijft, de populatiecontrole noodzakelijk is voor overbegrazing en omdat er geen natuurlijke vijand meer is. En dus ook om massale sterfte bij droogte te vermijden. En dat het verbod in Vlaanderen geen impact zal hebben op het aantal dieren dat wordt afgeschoten. De andere vraag is natuurlijk of dat dit geen symbolische maatregel hier in Vlaanderen is. Men beweert dat België een van de grootste afnemers is van importeurs is van kangoeroevlees. Nu, ik kan mij hier toch niet voorstellen dat dat zo ruim op de agenda staat. Ik heb mij laten vertellen dat dat vooral doorvoer is. Dus dan zouden we toch eens moeten kijken wat die cijfers eigenlijk betekenen en wat dat wil zeggen dat wij hier de grootste of een van de grootste importeurs van kangoeroevlees zouden zijn, of dat dat wel degelijk voor die Belgische markt is. Dat denk ik dat toch wel eens van wat meer nabij moet bekeken worden. De Europese Commissie stelt trouwens ook dat er geen juridische basis is voor een Europees invoerverbod op dierenwelzijngronden. Ik denk dat dat toch ook eens moet bekeken worden of dat dit Vlaams initiatief eigenlijk dan wel steek houdt. Bestaat die kans gewoon niet dat heel dit decreet op los zand wordt gebouwd. Er blijven dus heel veel vragen en uiteraard mogen er over dierenwelzijn, ik vind dat ook zelf heel belangrijk, vragen gesteld worden. Maar daarom moeten we juist concrete informatie hebben, vergelijkbare standaarden, objectieve gegevens en niet dus louter op emotionele perceptie. Ik heb een aantal vragen voor de verschillende sprekers. Sommige zijn ook al wel door de collega's wat gesteld, maar ik ga ze toch in volgorde stellen. Kan u toelichten hoe die quota voor kangoeroebeheer wetenschappelijk worden bepaald en op welke manier rekening wordt gehouden met droogte, klimaat en biodiversiteit? Er is al over die biodiversiteit wel uitleg gegeven, maar misschien kunnen de andere sprekers die dat niet deden hun visie daar nog over geven. Klopt het dat het effectieve commerciële afschot doorgaans ruim onder de toegestane quota blijft? Wat betekent dat voor de stelling dat de industrie de drijvende kracht zou zijn achter de reductie van de populatie? Blijkbaar is het vooral het commerciële afschot dat een steen des aanstoots is in de ogen van bepaalde groepen. Waarom wordt voor deze formule voor commercieel afschot geopteerd? Is er daarvoor een alternatief mogelijk? En indien commerciële, en dat is wat de collega al heeft gevraagd, commerciële verwerking volledig zou verboden zijn, zouden er dan nog die noodzakelijke populatiecontroles plaatsvinden? En wat zou er dan gebeuren met de karkassen? Welke gevolgen zou een volledig verbod op populatiebeheer hebben op de biodiversiteit, op de landbouw en op dierenwelzijn tijdens die droogteperiodes? En welke meerkost zou dit voor de overheid kunnen betekenen, gelet op mogelijke schadevergoedingen die betaald moeten worden? In welke mate bestaan de verplichte opleidingen, controles en sancties voor jagers die de humane gedragscode niet naleven? In de reportage van de Keuringsdienst van Waarde werd gesteld dat het in de praktijk moeilijk is om altijd correcte kopschoten uit te voeren wegens nachtjacht en grote afstand. We hebben ook verschillende percentages gekregen van de verschillende sprekers. Ik denk dat er dus duidelijk bij de statistieken nog wel iets aan de hand is, maar de vraag dus welke verbeteringen zijn er eventueel nog mogelijk om die schoten meer doelgericht te maken. De indieners spreken over twijfels over de humane uitvoering van de bejaging op kangoeroes. Ook de reportage van de Keuringsdienst van Waarde toont beelden van het verwijderen van poten, het villen van dieren in het veld en karkassen die achterblijven. Hoe kan u toelichten of die twijfels over de correcte uitvoering terecht zijn? Waarom die praktijken plaatsvinden, welke regels daarvoor gelden en hoe dit zich verhoudt tot de Australische dierenwelzijns- en hygiënevoorschriften. Wat met de jongen, de Joes? De indieners beweren dat die jongen gewoon aan een lot worden overgelaten nadat de moeder wordt afgeschoten. Klopt dit? Welke bijkomende verbeteringen acht de Australische overheid zelf nog wenselijk op het vlak van dierenwelzijn? Men spreekt van onnodig onnodig dierenleed. Is dit dan nog te reduceren? De controle, dat is blijkbaar de moeilijkheid in dit heel dossier, dat er slechte controle mogelijk is. Ik hoorde ook no independent monitoring, dus dat er geen controle zou zijn. Dat vraag ik me toch ook af in welke mate dat klopt. Dus de hele handhaving binnen de sector, hoe kan dat nog verbeteren? En dan tenslotte nog, hoe kijkt Australië naar de beslissing van bepaalde sportmerken om af te stappen van kangoeroeleer? Er zijn ook meer en meer sporters die ten persoonlijke titel te kennen geven geen kangoeroeleer meer te willen dragen. Heeft dit een impact volgens u op de populatiecontrole of enkel op de valorisatie van de producten? Dank u wel.
Dank u wel. Collega Van Olmen.
Dank u wel, voorzitter. Ook namens onze fractie bijzonder dank aan de sprekers om hier toelichting te brengen vandaag bij de problematiek van de dierenwelzijn, het onder controle behouden van de kangoeroe in Australië. Er zijn heel wat diffuse uitspraken gebeurd, dus we hebben heel wat meer inzicht gekregen, maar ondertussen blijft toch nog een en ander onduidelijk. Voor ons was het ook wel belangrijk om even te weten of de vinger te kunnen opleggen op wat nu echt die problematiek is van het grote aantal kangoeroes. We horen van de impact op de biodiversiteit, impact op de kangoeroes zelf. En dan is een beetje de vraag van in welke mate, wat is de impact van de commerciële jacht of wat het natuurbeheer. En we vernemen wel vanuit alle sprekers dat er eigenlijk het evenwicht natuurlijk niet kan hersteld blijven wegens het afwezig zijn van de natuurlijke predatoren. En mijn vraag is dan ook, worden daar initiatieven in genomen om daar ergens een herstel te doen, zodanig dat dat natuurlijke evenwicht zonder kunstmatig beheer via jacht noodzakelijk te maken. Dus de vraag is of daar initiatief in genomen wordt. Ook toch wel wat bijzonder, getriggerd door de cijfers van de export naar ons land toe. We hebben die cijfers vooraf ook gezien, maar ik zag vooral in de toelichting van Benami dat die de afgelopen jaren ook wel enorm nog is toegenomen. We zijn de grote exportland. Zijn er daar redenen toe waarom dat die export van kangoeroeproducten naar ons land toe zo zijn toegenomen? En dan nog een laatste vraag. Een vraag meer naar, kijk, om welke reden ook dat die jacht toch zou nodig zijn. Kan er toch nog meer duiding gegeven worden van hoe dat die opleidingen gebeuren naar die kangoeroejagers? Hoe worden die opgeleid, erkend, gecontroleerd, gesanctioneerd? Omdat we daar toch ook heel wat verschillende signalen rond krijgen rond de ernst en de ethiek waarmee dat deze hun taak opnemen. Dus er kan daar ook nog wat meer duiding over gegeven worden. En dan tenslotte misschien ook nog een beetje duiding van de ambassadeur rond de quota. Er zijn quota, hoe worden die bepaald? Is dat in functie echt van de biodiversiteit, de voedselgas, of is dat ook echt op die commerce gericht? Graag daar nog wat duidelijkheid rond. Dank u wel.
Dank u wel, collega's. De ambassadeur zit daar. Dat is de heer ambassadeur van Australië zit daar. Mr. Creaser, I give you the floor. There's a lot of questions that were put. You take your time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There were a lot of questions and very important questions as well, and they do cover quite a range of different aspects of hunting. I may begin and provide some responses to those questions, but I'll also draw upon my colleagues, Catherine and Ron, to come in, particularly on the areas where, of course, they do have great expertise. First of all, I won't do the answers in exact order, but I might just pick up on some of the things that are perhaps particularly more relevant to my knowledge base. So just regarding food safety standards, so Australian authorities have informed that the Australian export establishments are required to perform microbial testing to demonstrate the compliance with Australian and EU standards, which does include the prohibition of use of lactic acid. So that is not true that lactic acid is used for decontamination. Furthermore, a Commission audit report from 2019, which was undertaken by DG Sante on Australia's meat export systems, which included red meat and game meat, which includes kangaroo, confirmed that Australia's compliance with the EU's importing requirements. The EU member states' risk-based import checks on kangaroo meat have also not shown any evidence that Australian kangaroo meat would pose a threat to the health of EU consumers. So I really want to refute that very quickly. Australia is known globally for having exceptional food safety regulations and food safety standards and conditions, and so I do want to discount that very strongly. So there was a comment made very early in the piece around a rejection of the comparison with wild boar. From the perspective of ethical methods at the moment of kill, we think it's actually very valid to make that comparison. We brought that into this conversation just to demonstrate that where there is wild game hunting, there are different practices that are undertaken, but there are also very similar practices, and we can see some similarities with the way that wild boar is treated at that point of kill to the way that kangaroos are as well. So we just wanted to, again, make the comment that we think there is definitely validity in making that comparison. Questions with regards to the quota. So the quotas are based on ecological considerations, and the quotas overall are, very small compared to the overall population of kangaroos. The quotas are also established on a regional basis, looking at the ecological perspective from that regional basis. The quotas aren't or are rarely, or if ever, met. So the culling is actually below the level of quotas. Commercial hunting is one method for trying to achieve those quotas, but also population management is undertaken by state government authorities. And there is also licences that are provided to landholders who can also undertake limited population culling where there's impacts upon their land. So the overall quota system is absolutely driven by the need to protect ecological values in the natural environment, and hence why that assessment is done at that regional level. Now, there was questions around what's our position or our view with regards to whether or not the EU may be in breach of trade law, or Flanders may be in breach of trade law if this ban was to be pursued. We're not an expert on EU trade law. However, we do know that the European Commission and Spain said that this proposed ban would not or is not compliant with EU trade law. We do see that a ban on kangaroo meat and kangaroo products certainly will not reduce the need to continue to cull kangaroos. So that culling will continue irregardless of whether the commercialisation aspect is removed. But I think the real shame of actually removing that commercialisation opportunity is a product which is incredibly beneficial in many ways. The meat, as you've already heard, is actually a very healthy meat. It's very low in fat. Where it's being sourced on, agricultural land and pastoral lands, it is effectively organic meat. So there are many positive attributes about kangaroo meat, and many people have chosen to have it as a significant part of their diet. Similarly, the skins are incredibly unique, thin skins that are incredibly strong and have been used for sports apparel and for leather for car seats. So again, it's a very well sought after commodity, which unfortunately, as people have rightly indicated, more companies are choosing not to source it, primarily because of the strong campaigns where we would say there is misinformation describing how kangaroos are sourced to provide those products. So just to reiterate, commercial hunting will not stop culling of kangaroos. It's been clearly recognised, as Dr Moseby has indicated, that damage is done across Australia to ecological communities. Her own lived experiences of trying to re-establish threatened plants and continually being eaten or knocked down by kangaroos. So there are some questions around, how do we actually ensure that professional hunters or hunters are, meeting the code, meeting the practices under the code. And I think rightly it's been pointed out by some people that Australia is a vast continent. The areas that we cover are large. Many of the, much of the culling can take place in remote or regional areas. The code of practice, we believe, is quite world-leading in terms of its intent, and I think that has been recognised. It is fair to say that it is difficult with any regulation anywhere in the world to be able to monitor everything all the time. Certainly, if there are any indications or any reports of cruelty, with intent, then there are regulations in place in Australia to prosecute that cruelty. And so if people are seeing evidence of that, then it should be reported and it should be dealt with, under our laws. It's not in the interest of hunters to not have a headshot. The headshot is the most effective way for a quick kill of the animal. A single shot is obviously the most economic way to do it as well. However, no culling program is perfect. And of course, there will be incidences where there will be missed shots. And again, it is the onus of the hunter to ensure that that animal, if it is injured, is quickly attended to and euthanized as quickly as possible. With regards to the culling of joeys, so the code goes into detail on how that would be undertaken, and of course it takes into consideration the age of the joey. So where the joey is still dependent upon its mother, then it's in the interest to euthanize the joey again as quickly as possible. And with as least distress as possible. It is a stressful and ultimately fatal action that's being undertaken, but the code has identified the practices which are the most effective and most efficient to kill that dependent joey. Where it's deemed that a joey is independent of the mother and could survive on itself, then it would be able to remain alive. But again, this is not an easy thing. Nobody enjoys this, but as part of the culling program, it's a really important consideration. And the fact that it has been addressed in the code of practice, I think, is a really good indication of how thorough that code of practice has been. The other thing I should mention is that each of our state jurisdictions apply regulations to enact that code of practice. And so our state jurisdictions, ultimately have the oversight responsibility for that regulation. just going quick, sorry, this is a little bit out of order, but just going back to quotas, the methodology for establishing quotas is a long, detailed document. It in itself doesn't necessarily consider climate per se, but overall in terms of ecological impact and the management of those ecological communities. Of course, climate is a big consideration, and really, you know, the terminology that's quite common in Australia is the boom and bust cycle, which is where we talk about good conditions where we do have plentiful rainfall and plentiful feed for both domestic stock and wildlife. But then the bust situation is where we do have dry periods and extended dry periods. And you saw some examples in the footage of where, you know, paddocks are bare of any really edible foliage, hence leading to, you know, those sort of mass die-offs of kangaroos in those situations. So again, the quotas are very small compared to the overall population, and it's rare that the quota is actually met. But where you can actually do, you know, controlled shooting programs, particularly in those areas where there are sensitive ecological communities, then you're actually helping to sustain that ecological community for longevity. I'm just going through some of the questions. Okay, I might just quickly look at my notes. What I might do now is actually hand over to Ron and Catherine to talk about some of the other specific points. I'm wondering, Ron, whether you might be able to talk a little bit more about hunter training, accreditation and sanctioning, which was one of the questions. And if Ron's not there, I'll just check and see where...
No,
okay, Ron.
I'm here.
Thank you.
Peter? Yeah, well, as to compliance to working to the code of practice for any harvester, there is a lot of training that goes into it. Your accuracy testing, your credibility first for firearms license, all the dealings as you would understand. But there's also another regulatory body that monitors the kangaroo industry as well in the New South Wales Food Authority, which makes sure that harvesters have good game hygiene and handling when eviscerating their animals, gutting, dressing the animals, making sure that hygiene standards are met. As you know, those practices are followed right through to the factory, and once the factory's got their animals inside, then they do further inspections on those carcasses to make sure that they haven't been body shot. If they have been body shot, they will be put aside. That shooter will be sanctioned for what has happened, and the carcass is disposed of. So, for people that think that yes, a body shot, you can just do it and hide it. It's not. These animals are inspected. They're treated with respect. And when they're in those facilities, that is then when those processors look at where those animals are being shot. So that's how they determine what animals get processed and what gets thrown out. And the overarching body will then be informed if there has been a missed shot, and that shooter, harvester, will be sanctioned for what's happened.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. I'm also going to ask Catherine to step in and perhaps provide a little bit more explanation around the ecological surveys that are or the surveys that are undertaken that will sort of help inform the ecological management.
Sure, yeah, and I want to acknowledge that this is an emotional issue for a lot of people because the kangaroo is obviously a native, animal in Australia, and it holds a lot of love and respect for that animal. I'm a conservation biologist, and I eat kangaroo because I think it is the most ethical It's a wild game. It's free range. When you think about what we do to our farmed animals, with dehorning them, castrating them, slaughtering them, keeping them on trucks for 3 days, I don't eat any farmed animals because I think they're treated horribly. But I'm well and will stand up and protect and say that I will eat kangaroo because I think it is extremely ethical meat. So I just want to say that to start with. And I think I'm a scientist, so my decisions are not based on emotion. They're based on science and facts. And the fact is the Australian government lists grazing pressure by kangaroos as a threatening process to 152 threatened plants and 5 animals in Australia. So it is a significant issue to biodiversity. There's a special issue in the journal Ecological Management and Restoration that I encourage you to read that talks about the biodiversity impacts and overpopulation of kangaroos in Australia, and there's lots of publications. And I think it's really easy to cherry pick information and provide misinformation on this topic because of the high emotion that it creates, but I think it's really important to actually read the science behind it as well. The quotas are one of the most intensive tools that is used in South Australia that involves both ground and aerial surveys for kangaroos. They have worked out through modelling that you can take 15 to 20% of the roo population and that will keep it sustainable. In actual fact, they usually only harvest between 2 and 5%, so much, much, much lower levels. Now, because of that, because the harvesting and the demand is not really there for kangaroo products, which is unfortunate, what South Australia does, and most states do, is they issue permits to destroy wildlife to farmers. So if you're a farmer, you can apply for a permit to destroy wildlife for hundreds, sometimes thousands of kangaroos, and you get issued that permit from the government based on those quotas, and you can go and shoot those animals and let them lie on the ground, and they're just wasted. So I can guarantee you that if commercial roo harvesting stops, that will increase kangaroo suffering because the oversight for the permit to destroy wildlife is nowhere near as intensive as it is for commercial roo harvesting. So you're going to get more animals just culled and left to lie on the ground, and you're going to get more animals dying during drought. I mean, that's just facts. So, and I'm willing to debate anybody on those, at a later date, but that's what the science says. One thing people aren't aware of is in Australia, we have the longest man-made structure in the world, which is the dingo fence. So it's 5,000 kilometres long. North of that, we have dingoes and they control kangaroos. And we have very little harvesting or culling of kangaroos north of that dog fence because there's dingoes there and they keep the kangaroo numbers down. South of that dog fence is where there's no predators, and that's where we have the overpopulation, and that's where the majority of the harvesting and the culling happens. So, we can't let those dingoes down because people are grazing sheep and sheep are eaten by dingoes. So I would love to let the dingoes south of the dog fence, but unfortunately people want to eat they want to eat sheep and they want to have wool, so that's not going to happen. So yeah, I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. And I've sort of made the most of that opportunity to just go through some of the questions. Another question was asked was around the culling of mothers. So one of the statistics I provided was that 85% of shot kangaroos were male kangaroos. So to the extent that's possible, commercial hunters will try and limit the number of female kangaroos that are shot, and will target male kangaroos. I also just wanted to note there was a point made around consideration of modifying a proposal if Australia can provide hard guarantees. It's an interesting proposition and one that I'll take on notice. So thank you for making that point. And I may just check with you, Chair, if there's any obvious questions that I may have missed out on, or perhaps if the committee, if there's anything that I have missed out.
Can you have a second round?
Yeah, sure.
If questions were not answered.
Yeah.
Okay, then so we can have a second round if questions were not answered. So now we go over to George Berenami, Doctor.
Hi, hello. Really good questions put forward by the parliamentarians, so thank you. We'll try to answer in a way that address the points made by fellow members from Australia. First, I wanted to say about females. Why do females need to be killed? That's a fantastic question. If we didn't kill females, we wouldn't have to kill the joeys. There was an effort made to not kill females, only males, but it lasted only for 4 years because farmers insisted on killing females. So the industry reverted back to doing that. And the numbers that I'm aware of are 30% over a long-term average, not including the period when it was stopped. And 30% is roughly the number of females that are killed. And so then the welfare issue becomes unavoidable because of what we spoke about earlier. I don't need to go into that again. I'm not saying shooters are bad people. I think they're good people, but I think that it's just really difficult to dispose of young ones that are out of pouch and dependent. You just kind of shooters. There have been studies documenting this. It's in my presentation that I'll send you. It's referenced. Shooters simply let the dependent young leave. They don't want to kill them. And then when you say the term euthanasia on young that are in the pouch means taking the pouch. Well, you saw in the video with the kid, which is horrible, but it's done by adults. The code of practice says bash the head of the joey on a hard object. That's what euthanasia is. And you can say that's humane. I don't think it's humane. I think a lot of people would say that's not humane. So that's what happens in terms of joeys and dependent young. There's just no way of overcoming that issue. I want to say that a lot was said about biodiversity and the impact of kangaroos on biodiversity. And there is a big elephant in the room, so to speak, about this issue that we didn't really raise. It was said here and there. In Australia, there are more sheep and cows than there are kangaroos and people put together in the landscape. And many studies have already documented the impact of hard-hooved animals like sheep and cattle on the landscape. That is the major cause of loss of biodiversity in Australia. It is well documented. No ecologist will argue about that. And then after that, we have rabbits that have come into Australia. We have foxes and cats that have huge impact on small native wildlife. And then after all that, you can start thinking perhaps about kangaroos. I mean, they're the animals that belong in the landscape, and they're being blamed for loss of biodiversity when cattle and sheep and foxes and cats and rabbits, these are the real problems that Australia's biodiversity face. And as I said, occasionally you might have a population problem in a certain area, in a certain region. So in that sense, then maybe a management solution is needed, but we do not need a national culling of kangaroos or say harvest or killing of kangaroos on a yearly basis to save biodiversity. We have a lot of other problems to fix first in Australia. So that's about biodiversity. And then in terms of quotas, a question was asked about why are the quotas there? What do they mean? What's the biological basis or the ecological basis of the quotas? Well, if you look at, and I can send you the management programs. Each state has its own management program. You have Western Australia, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia. Nowhere does it say damage mitigation or preserve biodiversity. I think in most, it would say first that it's a sustainable resource. Kangaroos are a sustainable resource for the kangaroo industry. It's like taking gold out of the ground, like taking oil out of the ground. You take kangaroos out of the landscape and sell it to the highest bidders, maybe in the US, maybe in Europe. So it's not about culling. It's a commercial business, and the business drives the killing. The quotas the 15 to 20%. That's not about ecology of biodiversity of the landscape. That's about how many kangaroos can you take out without decreasing the populations. That's what the quotas are, and they're not designed for South Australia or regions in South Australia or for areas in New South Wales or Queensland. It's just broad scale percentages that are meant to align with the reproductive capacity of kangaroos. There's no connection between the quotas and biodiversity. Otherwise, it would be much more difficult to manage. There should be a link. There should be a biological index that says, oh, we have a biodiversity problem in Southern Australia in a particular region because the environment is different in different areas. And then we must handle kangaroos, perhaps, after we considered all the other issues. That's what should occur, but it doesn't occur. We just have a population quota that's not related at all to biodiversity and biological conditions of the landscape. That is the whole problem. I mean, everybody has said it themselves, but they're framing it in a way that it's about kangaroos, and it's not. And I'd like to talk about food safety. There's mention that no lactic acid is used, and the meat is great. Well, I have to say, we sampled supermarkets in Australia back in 2013, 2012, and kangaroo meat coming out of supermarket shelves was like sewage. I mean, I wouldn't feed it to my pets, to my animals, or to my worst enemies. It was that bad. And we published this. It was in the news. It's news items. It's not a secret. Other studies have documented, peer-reviewed studies as well. And kangaroos are known to harvest very dangerous pathogens. That's all that been PhDs and studies done about it. The kangaroo industry doesn't like to admit it. Now, once we published all this atrocious level of hygiene in the kangaroo industry, they were first treated with acetic acid and with barrels at the processing station where they'd spray the kangaroo carcasses with acetic acid to wash away all the contamination. Then the industry moved from acetic acid to lactic acid. I personally was involved in testing kangaroo meat in Belgium, in France, in Netherlands, in Germany, to see what levels of lactic acid were there. And they were high. They were way above the natural levels, indicating that it is being used. This is several years ago, not this year. Maybe now they're not. I don't know, but I think it's not true to say that the meat is not treated. And the main issue is not E. coli and salmonella. The main issue is that you have untrained butchers degutting carcasses in the field in remote locations at night. There's no supervision. Even in South Africa, where you have game meat industry, the meat, the wildlife is shot, and then within less than 4 hours, it's brought to a central place where there's a certified butcher on a clean sheet on the ground, supervising the gutting of the animals before they go to refrigeration. In Australia, there's a cost-saving process, and there's lying to the Europeans. Basically, the kangaroo, there's not only are there no butchers on site, and shooters that have been trained for a few hours are expected to know how to decut properly and safely the animals. There's no refrigeration on the trucks. They won't even invest a dollar in putting refrigeration on trucks, not to expose the carcasses to flies and maggots that are in the field. They can drive for 8 hours. The only rule that they have is that they have to bring the carcasses within 2 hours of sunrise to a chiller. So they drive hundreds of kilometers in the dust, in the outback, and then think that they can keep the kangaroos sanitary. No, it's impossible under these conditions. It could happen, perhaps. You said you should seek guarantees. You definitely should seek guarantees. But this is what happens at the moment, and this is the risk, the pathogenic risk that's inherent to the kangaroo industry. I think I've answered most of the issues raised. If there are more questions, I'll be very happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Now we go to the Mr. McKnight and Hewitt from Back to Country.
Thanks, Joel. Unfortunately, the translator wasn't working for us in Zoom. But we were going on the body language and the tone to hear a lot of the story. So thank you, everybody. Look, in regards to kangaroo I've been taught that when we take the kangaroo, it's done in ceremony. Nothing's wasted. Those who lead the taking of kangaroo identifies the animal that would best be taken, the one that's probably a little bit sick, not the large male, not the female, because we're going to have unaccounted joeys. So holding a voice for kangaroo, we're asking you to look at the story of the disrespect of how that animal's treated. No one wants to see any animal slaughtered, limbs cut off, disemboweled. No one wants to see any animal starving by around dams and artificial waterways. Australia's mismanagement of its sacred animal has led us to this point. So the voice of being a voice for kangaroo, I'm inviting you to enable Australia to look locally, respectfully at an animal that it calls a pest, to stop an industrialised slaughter of this sacred animal overseas. We need to look at it ourselves so that we can care for it, not manage, care, using the knowledges that we have here, which is informed by local people, as well as other Western knowledges. Anything else you want to add to that?
The only thing I'd like to add is I've been in academia for 20-something years, and we can have an academic debate, and science can go this side, science can go that side. And something that I've been teaching for a long time is how do we put spirit back into science? And that's what Uncle Max used to always ask me, have you got spirit put back into science yet? Because our old people were scientists, but there was a real deep spiritual connectedness and relationship to that science. And that does not exist in this case. And a lot of our animals, like giving farmers a license to shoot any native animals, that's a completely different debate. But it does show that there's no spirit into that understanding or that action that can allow anyone just to shoot anything. For us, they're our brothers and sisters. In our creation story, they came before us. It's the humans that were born last. And there's a reason why we're born last. And we can see the evidence, well, in this country since 1788, that total lack of the spirit of this place and the commodification and, economic-driven research and a whole range of different things, and then there's no spirit into it. And in its most simplest form, what I mean by spirit is that gratitude. How does that show gratitude and respect to BRU? Whether it's a commercial or culling, that doesn't exist at the moment. I totally agree with Pete. We've got to localise it first. Got to bring it, have these heavy debates around on that local context. And then people from different mobs across Australia, the 350 mobs, have those conversations with governments and different things, and every mob might have a different thing where it lands on how those local approaches look for. We can only really speak on behalf of the Yuin BRU of kangaroo. But yeah, I kind of really got thrown today in that sense of the way a sentinel being was discussed and talked about. It was quite upsetting. And you can't, from my point of view, my experience, you can't take the emotion out of things, because then you're not looking at it holistically and with spirit. Thank you for listening.
Dank je very much. Beste collega's, zijn er vragen onbeantwoord gebleven of bijkomende vragen in een tweede ronde? Oké, collega Verduert.
Ja, dank u wel, mevrouw de voorzitter. Ja, allereerst, er worden hier in het debat heel veel goede intenties uitgesproken en ik denk dat die terecht zijn. Ik denk inderdaad, door een van de sprekers werd gezegd, ja, die jagers hebben geen slechte intentie, daar gaat het inderdaad niet over. Maar het is nu eenmaal door de aard van de jacht dat het onvermijdbaar is, denk ik, dat daar taferelen gebeuren die we vandaag ook hebben zien passeren, die vreselijk zijn. En ja, net werd gezegd, ja, het is een emotioneel debat. Aan de andere kant zei de collega naast me, ja, we mogen de emoties niet laten spelen. Vandaar ook dat ik het parlementair rapport uit 2021 van New South Wales er heb bijgehaald. Nogmaals, waar men 3,5 dag lang 40 sprekers aan bod liet komen. Het is een heel uitgebreid rapport geworden. Mensen die ter plaatse de situatie heel goed kennen, om net van die emoties ook weg te komen. Maar daarin zie je toch wel een aantal problemen die erkend worden. En het lastige ervan is, ik heb dan vooral gekeken, wat is er nadien gebeurd? Ja, de Australische pers zegt, er is eigenlijk geen fundamentele wijziging of koerswijziging van het beleid gekomen sinds dat rapport. Ja, er wordt hier verwezen naar de gedragscode. Een robuuste gedragscode wordt er gezegd. Misschien, mevrouw de voorzitter, toch even het verslag dat ik gewoon een stuk uit de gedragscode voorlees. Gewoon van alle emotie, maar ook even zeg, van wat staat er dan in die gedragscode? Dus misschien toch nuttig voor het debat. De meest geschikte methode die momenteel beschikbaar is voor de euthanasie van buideldieren is een slag op het hoofd. Deze methode wordt als acceptabel beschouwd omdat de schedel van buideldieren klein, zacht en dun zijn. Bij correcte toepassing treden bewusteloosheid en de dood snel op. Een enkele scherpe slag op de centrale schedelbotten veroorzaakt de dood door fysieke schade aan het centrale zenuwstelsel en verstoring van de hersenactiviteit. De dood treedt op als gevolg van ademhalings- en hartfalen. De effectiviteit en humaanheid van deze methode hangen af van de vaardigheid en de vastberadenheid van de uitvoerder. De slag moet met voldoende kracht worden toegediend en precies op het doel gericht zijn om ervoor te zorgen dat er voldoende schade wordt toegebracht aan vitale structuren van de hersenen om onmiddellijke en aanhoudende bewusteloosheid en de dood te veroorzaken. Als deze procedure niet correct wordt uitgevoerd, zal er sprake zijn van wisselende maten van bewustzijn en is het waarschijnlijk dat het dier zal lijden voor zijn dood. Als de eerste slag de schedel niet raakt, maar bijvoorbeeld de kaak of een ledemaat, of als de hersenen niet voldoende worden beschadigd, zal het dier pijn en leed ervaren. En tot slot nog een heel klein stukje over de jongen. Om de hersenschudding toe te dienen, haal je het jong voorzichtig uit de buidel. Let op, ze zitten in dit ontwikkelingsstadium nog niet permanent vast aan de tepel, maar kunnen nog wel zuigen. Hou je het jong stevig vast bij de achterpoten, rond de bovenkant van de achterpoten en de basis van de staart, en ze zwaaien vervolgens krachtig en snel in een boog, zodat de achterkant van de kop van het jong tegen een groot, stevig oppervlakte slaat dat niet beweegt of samendrukt tijdens de impact. Bijvoorbeeld de laadbak van een bestelwagen. Dat staat er in die gedragscode, waarvan het parlementair rapport zegt dat die niet eens altijd nageleefd wordt. Dus laat mij dan toch zeggen van, en nogmaals, ik ben daar niet bij, wij leven heel ver van de bush af, maar als ik vaststel, dit is de code die moet gevolgd worden en zelfs die wordt niet nageleefd, ja, dan denk ik dat we hier vandaag meer dan aan symboolpolitiek doen, maar dat we ons echt oprecht de vraag stellen, want dat is de job die wij moeten doen. Zijn die producten op onze markt, zijn die gelieerd aan dierenwelzijn of niet? En het klopt inderdaad dat Europa en ook Spanje kritisch zijn voor het voorstel. Dat is absoluut terecht dat die opmerking gemaakt wordt. Ja, ik verwijs... En goed, dat is niet de vraag die vandaag voor ligt, dus we zullen met Europa verder moeten kijken hoe we daarmee verder gaan. Maar ik wil toch even heel graag verwijzen naar het jaar 2008, toen dit land een verbod op zeehondenbond invoerde. En ik heb hier een krantartikel van toen bij. Wie was er kritisch op dat voorstel? Dat was Europa. Wat is er later gebeurd? Wel, heel Europa heeft zelf het verbod ingevoerd. Dus het is ook wel af en toe aan ons om onze nek uit te steken, denk ik. Maar goed, dat is een discussie voor later. De vraag die vandaag vooral voor ligt, zijn die producten op onze markt geleerd aan dierenleed of niet? En tot slot afsluitend, als ik uit het debat twee zaken die mij daarin opvallen is, ja, ecologisch beheer stelt hier niemand in vraag. Hè. Ik denk dat dat nodig is. Hè. Er werd opnieuw verwezen naar de everzwijnen. Ik ben het daar niet mee eens dat dat vergelijkbaar is. Maar goed, ook daar is er ecologisch beheer nodig. Het probleem hier is dat er commerciële belangen aan gelinkt zijn. En dan wordt het debat natuurlijk soms diffuus. Hè. Waar stopt het ecologisch beheer? Waar begint het commercieel belang? Dat is de lastige inschatting, vind ik, uit het debat. En een tweede conclusie die ik toch trek is van, ja, je ziet dat daar 20 miljoen jaar lang in Australië geen problemen zijn geweest, maar door de onder andere intensievere landbouw vandaag, die inderdaad, waarbij die beesten waarschijnlijk af en toe inderdaad lastig zijn voor die landbouw en dergelijke, dat we vandaag met die discussies in Australië zitten. Ik laat die discussie nogmaals voor Australië, die zijn niet aan ons besteed. Wij moeten onze job doen en onze job gaat over de producten op onze markt. Maar het is gewoon een vaststelling die ik doe na de verschillende sprekers nogmaals gehoord hebben.
Collega De Bleker.
Ja, dank u. Ik zou ook nog een paar kleine dingen willen zeggen. Eerst en vooral dank voor de antwoorden uiteraard. Ik denk dat het duidelijk is dat er nood is aan het managen van de populatie. Dat hebben de sprekers ook duidelijk gemaakt, vooral voor de biodiversiteit, voor planten en dieren. Het is duidelijk dat het intomen van de populatie ook zou blijven verder bestaan als er geen commerciële actie aan verbonden was. En het is ook duidelijk dat die Code of Conduct een instrument is om dat managen te doen. Dat er een systeem is gecreëerd voor inspectie, voor monitoring, maar het is ook duidelijk dat daar nog verbeteringen zouden moeten aangebracht worden. Maar ik zou toch een aantal dingen nog ook willen zeggen. Ik heb gezegd, we mogen ons niet laten leiden door emotie, we moeten ons op feiten baseren en dan doet het mij toch wel zeer dat er wordt gesuggereerd of geïnsinueerd dat vlees op de Europese markt slecht zou zijn voor de gezondheid van bepaalde mensen of dat het niet zou voldoen aan bepaalde normen en voorwaarden. Er is al naar verwezen naar een studie van DG Santé die duidelijk heeft gemaakt dat het vlees compatibel is met de EU-regulations, wetgeving, en dat die ook de standaarden voor het verwerken van die industrie dat die gerespecteerd worden. En in België, als er vlees wordt geïmporteerd, moet dat volgens de protocollen van het FAVV gebeuren. Daar is heel strenge controle op. Dus suggereren dat er hier vlees op de markt zou worden gebracht dat de gezondheid van Europese burgers in gevaar brengt, dat vind ik niet oké. I think it's not true. Sorry, I think. Ik vind dat we ons op feiten moeten baseren. En dan wat de jacht nog betreft, collega, u zegt niemand leeft in Europa van, of dus geen commercieel iets, die everzwijnpopulatie inperken. Wel, de jacht in Europa is 180 miljard euro waard. Dus zeggen dat dat niet vergelijkbaar is, ik ben daar niet mee akkoord. En het verbod op walvissen en zeehonden, dat is een bedreigde diersoort. Hier spreken we niet over een bedreigde diersoort. Dus die link maken vind ik ook niet correct. Maar ik ben toch wel wat wijzer geworden uit de hoorzitting. En dit debat is nog niet ten einde. We gaan dit verder blijven voeren. Geen verdere vragen. Dank u wel.
Nog collega's? So, who of the speaker want to respond? You want to respond?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to respond to two things. One was food safety and the other one was animal welfare and animal suffering. The killing of animals anytime, is a dramatic event, absolutely. And we do kill a lot of animals, whether it's domestic and of course wildlife. Sometimes that is for ecological purposes. The slaughtering of animals for consumption does result in dismembering of the animal. I mean, obviously that's a natural part of the process once the animal is dead, so that does take place. In terms of the joeys, when you do read the Code of Conduct, it is a very explicit document in the way it actually describes how a hunter would go about euthanizing joeys. It is very explicit. If you were to read the Belgian slaughter code for cattle, for example, I think you would find that would be also quite explicit around the methods that you would undertake, to slaughter that animal. None of this is, pleasant to read, but the fact that this has been based on American Veterinary Association standards and that it is captured in the Code of Conduct to try and provide the most efficient way of euthanizing, that animal as quickly as possible with as minimal stress as possible. Of course, it's ultimately a very stressful event, but it is designed to minimise that to the extent that you can. It's not in the interest of the hunter to delay, to be cruel, to not be efficient in that process, from a commercial perspective. The other point that I'll make, and I really want to make this point very, very strongly around food safety, Australia does not put food products onto any market, let alone the EU market, in a condition that is not suitable for export. Our reputation internationally is right up there on the top. I've spoken to many importers in Europe who have validated how high our standards are on food safety, but also on biosecurity and sustainability. The references to past practices in, I think it was 2013, I mean, this is very dated. And if there are any indications of non-compliant or illegal activities when it comes to food safety, similarly, if there is any identified actions where there is wanton cruelty towards animal, there's an obligation on those that are seeing or hearing or receiving evidence of that to actually report that to authorities, and for there to be a process to seek prosecution of individuals that might be undertaking those actions. And Australia stands by its legal system when it comes to prosecuting illegal activities. So those 2 points, I think, are really important. I think, the very valid comment that really at the end of the day, this is very much around animal welfare. This is what this hearing is about animal welfare. And it's about really, trying to provide this committee with a level of satisfaction that animal suffering is kept to a minimum. Culling, by nature, results in a suffering of animals, but culling is about euthanasing that animal as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Culling is not 100% perfect, but the code talks about what you do when you do injure an animal. And, I think many of you would know hunters as I do, and the last thing they want to see is an animal suffering unnecessarily. And so, yes, mishaps can happen. Yes, there can be very dramatic footage and videos that are shown to portray a particular argument. But I think the challenge for this committee is to really ascertain whether or not what you're hearing is beyond doubt in terms of the extent that animals may be suffering beyond, that code of practice. I might leave it at that, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Benami, you raise your hand.
Thank you for the chance to just say one more word about 2 words. One about the welfare. There is probably a very good code of practice in place, but it's the nature of it, the industry is such that the code cannot be implemented properly. That is the problem. It's just to do with kangaroos are in the landscape at night in remote locations. So it's very difficult to implement the code. It's very impossible to regulate the code. And this is where the problem is, and in the industry itself, not in the code. The code is fantastic, or best practice in such an industry. And I think that this is the issue that we must grapple with, and the talk about biodiversity is not really related to kangaroos when you consider all the non-native animals that have been imported into Europe. They outnumber kangaroos, they outnumber human beings, and that is the real issue in Australia. And you can't solve the kangaroo problem without dealing first with the livestock and farming practices in Australia. Thank you.
Is there anyone online who wishes to respond again? No? Dear colleagues, beste collega's, nog? Nee? Dan denk ik dat we deze hoorzitting, die bijzonder boeiend was, kunnen afsluiten. Ik wil graag, I wish to thank all of the speakers for the very fruitful and intense debate. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the committee for giving us your time today. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.